All right. Well, good afternoon to those who are on the East Coast, I guess, and good morning to those on the Pacific, and welcome. My name is JP Gay. I am a regional sales director here at Cadient Talent, and we're very happy that you have taken some time out of your busy day to join us for today's webinar. Hiring is a task that, when done correctly, has a constant rhythm. It's always on. It's always feeding your locations with not just staff, but the right staff to keep operations running. And at Cadient Talent, we understand this pulse of the field, and we've built our platform to be the best end-to-end solution for screening, tracking, hiring in the field, a flexible platform to meet the unique demands of high-volume hourly hiring. As part of our solution, Cadient Talent offers a fully integrated pre-hire assessment tool that improves your ability to quickly, accurately, and fairly screen applicants for a broad range of positions. It's our assessment solution. And with that said, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Mike Baysinger. Mike's been our assessment practice manager since Cadient Talent was founded a little over a year ago. And prior to that, he served in a similar capacity with Kronos for 3 years before they spun off the talent acquisition business unit that became Cadient Talent today. He's been working with the assessments and is in the online testing arena for more than 10 years. Dr. Baysinger is an expert in the field of pre-employment testing, and he and his team have provided talent assessment solutions and related support to over 100 clients. These clients range from small to mid-sized businesses to also the Fortune 500 across a range of industries, including retail, grocery, quick serve, healthcare, and youth services. And before I hand the reins over to Mike, I'd just like to let everyone know that should you have any questions, please ask them via the chat option within the GoToMeeting application, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of today's session. That being said, Mike, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, JP, and thanks to all of you in attendance for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about assessments and how they can potentially help your organization to more quickly and efficiently identify and hire high potential applicants. So this is the agenda for today's webinar. It's organized around 5 key questions that anyone new to assessments or those looking to eke more value out of their current assessments should be asking. We'll start with a brief overview of what exactly assessments are and how they work, and then we'll discuss some of the benefits of using them with some examples of ROI for clients who have used our assessments. And then finally, we'll close things out by reviewing a few of the best practices for maximizing the utility of your assessments, should you choose to incorporate them into your hiring strategy. And there should be a couple of minutes at the end here in case there are any questions. So without further ado, let's kick things off by answering the most basic question: what is an assessment? Well, in the most general sense, an assessment is basically any tool or method that's used to evaluate candidates and learn more about them before making a hiring decision. This definition, which coincidentally is also the one that has been adopted by the federal government, implies that all screening tools that inform hiring decisions, whether it's a resume review, a background check, pre-screener questions, or even interviews, are all forms of assessments and thus are subject to federal oversight from agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. Now, regardless of the type of assessment method being used, all are designed to collect one or more of 3 types of information from candidates that yield some insight into how they would perform on the job if hired. And those are what candidates can and will do on the job, what candidates want to do on the job, and what candidates have done in prior jobs. The types of quote-unquote assessments most commonly used in job applications, such as resume screens, references, and qualifications questions, are useful, especially for gathering information about what candidates have done, but they're less useful at tapping into what candidates can, will, and want to do at work. And this is why many HR practitioners have found traditional assessments such as cognitive tests, personality measures, and work fit measures to be useful. Essentially, they represent an objective means of filling in those blanks. And these quote unquote traditional assessments will be the focus for today's webinar. With respect to traditional assessments, each one is generally structured as a series of questions that are usually administered during the initial application process. The nature of what's being measured, the number of questions, and the format may vary considerably depending on the qualities that are being assessed. Cadient Talent and my team focuses on non-cognitive assessments, such as those measuring personality traits, because one, they're the primary type of assessment we offer, and two, and arguably more importantly, the research that we've conducted across more than 100 organizations and involving millions of applicants has indicated that personality and temperament are critically important when it comes to predicting how people behave on the job consistently and over time. And this is especially true for entry-level hourly jobs where the cognitive demands may be low and yet turnover may be high. In contrast, we tend to avoid cognitive assessments because although they've proven to be relatively strong predictors of job performance, especially for complex or professional jobs, they have a far greater potential for disparate impact on protected race and gender groups, which may in turn hinder diversity hiring efforts and also bring unwanted attention from federal enforcement agencies like the EEOC. So now that we have a common framework for understanding what assessments are and what type of info they provide, let's dig into how they work. Again, keeping in mind that our focus here will be on non-cognitive assessments. So how do assessments work? Well, the short answer to this very complex question is that assessments work by predicting performance. More specifically, they predict key job-related outcomes, most frequently in the form of job performance behaviors. Or for those of you in the HR realm, you may have heard of these being referred to as performance competencies. These behaviors may be common to all jobs, or they could be specific to a particular type of job or job family. So examples of common cross-job behaviors could include things like fulfilling work requirements and effective decision-making, whereas job-specific ones, let's say for a customer-facing retail job, might include behaviors like building customer relationships and selling effectively. I want to note here that almost all Cadient assessments use a mix of both types of performance. And so the key takeaway here is that really the nature of performance behaviors may vary based on the type of job, but there may be some commonality across jobs. In a similar manner, on the predictor or trait side, the personality factors that facilitate high performance may also be job dependent. So for example, a CNA in a hospital or long-term care facility has very different tasks than a night crew stalker in a retail store. The CNA job involves lots of interactions with other people, mainly clients, whereas the night crew stalker job does not, and that's assuming that the incumbents do their stalking while the store is closed. But it does involve a lot of repetitive lifting of heavy objects, and because of this, the qualities or traits that predict performance for the CNA are more likely to be focused on interpersonal attributes like communication and friendliness, whereas the qualities important for night crew stalkers are more likely to be centered around attention to detail and rule following, traits that facilitate safe and accurate work. So to quickly recap things thus far, personality assessments measure traits that are related to performance for a given job. Excuse me. To be effective and legal, the link between these traits and job performance must be established empirically. In other words, there must be a statistically significant relationship between assessment scores and performance. This is done by conducting what we call a validation study, which we don't really have time to discuss in detail today, but essentially entails administering the assessment questions unscored to a sample of employees or applicants, having their supervisors rate the employees on the performance dimensions relevant to the job or jobs in question, and then having an industrial psychologist or team of psychologists analyze the correspondence between the two sets of data to build the overall assessment. So next, I'd like to briefly discuss how the assessments are structured, because it's important to understand how candidates' responses to the individual assessment questions get converted into an overall assessment score and corresponding score band. So each assessment question is associated with a specific trait being measured, and all questions measuring a given trait together comprise a scale. For example, the customer service assessment has a scale that measures the trait empathy and another scale that measures the trait optimism. Scale scores are then averaged together to get an overall assessment score. And this approach is considered compensatory because a high score on one scale or trait being measured can make up for a low score on another, which provides applicants another opportunity to show that they're qualified for the job. Finally, the raw assessment score is compared to the assessment cutoff scores in order to assign the applicant a score band, either red, yellow, or green, that corresponds to low, medium, or high predicted likelihood of demonstrating effective performance, assuming they were hired. The cut scores are based largely on the results of the validation study and are set in a manner that maximizes expected performance differences across score bands, while at the same time minimizing score differences as a function of race and gender. Not only does this help to promote a diverse hiring pool, it also helps to ensure the differences between the score bands vis-a-vis performance are actually meaningful. So now that everyone has a basic understanding of how assessments work, we can move on to the fun stuff, in my eyes anyway, the benefits of using them and the anticipated ROI. So what are the benefits of using assessments? Well, first, our assessments add value by increasing the quality of hiring decisions. More specifically, our assessments help to fill in the gaps for your hiring managers and recruiters. As you may recall from slide 3, personality assessments can provide objective information about job-related characteristics that can sometimes be hard to gauge just by looking at someone's resume and other application information, things like interpersonal skills, values, attitudes, and even motivational tendencies. Having more information about your candidate enables you to find consistencies or inconsistencies between those results and other application information, and as a result, enables better hiring decisions. So, over time, being able to more accurately predict employee performance will improve business results. We've proven this through multiple studies that have found relationships between assessment scores and things like hourly and total sales, discipline for safety violations, and other key business outcomes. And we do have some examples of these that we'll be going over shortly. Finally, the assessments add value beyond their ability to increase hiring accuracy and improve business performance by potentially helping to save hiring manager and recruiter time, and also therefore increase their productivity. And they do this by streamlining the application review process. Essentially, the assessments represent an objective data point that can be used along with other parts of the application to more quickly and efficiently prioritize which applicants to move forward in the hiring process. Now, these benefits are ones that you've likely seen other assessment providers touting, so I think it's also important to speak to what makes Cadient assessments different. First, our assessment results are provided in an easy to use and interpret format. So instead of displaying scores for a multitude of competencies or performance domains, we give feedback using simple color-coded score bands, green, yellow, and red, that reflect high, medium, and low predicted likelihood of success on the job, along with some descriptive text around the behaviors that are being predicted. Here's some talking in the background. Would you mind muting yourself? Thank you. So being able to quickly look at this information and process it helps to facilitate quick and easy prioritization of candidates for your hiring managers and recruiters. Another key differentiator for Cadient assessments is length. So our current suite of shelf assessments are shorter, and in some cases much shorter than the assessments offered by many of our competitors. The average Cadient assessment contains around 30 questions and takes less than 10 minutes to complete, and some have fewer than 20 questions and take as little as 6 to 8 minutes to complete on average. As I'm sure you know from your experience, shorter assessments means that you have fewer candidates dropping out of your application process. This next benefit is a big one. So Cadient assessments are directly integrated into our hiring solution. They're easily configurable, and the lack of a third-party integration not only shortens the implementation time, but it also facilitates making quick changes to your assessment strategy. It also means you have a unified support team because my team works closely with the client success organization to ensure your assessment related needs are met. So if, for example, you wanted to change the assessment mapping for a given job, or you have a brand new job that you've created and you really need an assessment for it, we can respond to that very, very quickly, often getting back to you the same day with the result. Finally, we offer some flexibility as far as how the assessments can be used, and so they can be placed in the application itself or in the hiring workflow depending on your needs. And if multiple assessments are desired or you want to use a multi-stage assessment, they can actually be split between the application and the hiring workflow. And so you have a lot of different options that you can use, and you can use different strategies for different jobs depending on your particular needs. So with that in mind, let's look at some examples of ROI. And really, at the end of the day, what matters with the assessments is whether or not they lead to better hiring decisions. So that's what we want to see. So the data you see here is drawn from 3 different multi-organization or consortium studies that examine the effectiveness of 3 different Cadient shelf assessments. Each graph represents aggregate results from multiple customers for a given assessment. In each case, managers of the employees who'd taken the noted assessment were asked to rate the overall performance of their employees using a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is very poor, 3 equals okay or successful, and 5 equals exceptional performance. The percentages you see here reflect the proportion of employees who are rated as exceptional performers, meaning they received a rating of 5 from their manager and had exceeded expectations in nearly all areas of their job. And what you'll notice here is that for each assessment, we see a nice stair-step pattern where the percentage of employees rated as exceptional increases as we move from red to yellow and yellow to green. And in all 3 cases, green scoring employees were more than twice as likely to be rated as exceptional performers as red scoring employees. And this is exactly what we want and hope to see when the assessments are functioning as intended. And so should you choose to take advantage of our assessments, this is something we can partner with you to examine by conducting a post-implementation quality of hire study. However, this is not the only form of ROI that we have the ability to look at. So here are some alternative indicators of ROI. We can look at things like attendance and punctuality. We can look at how much management time is required for a given employee, and we can also look at an employee's integrity. And so the attendance and punctuality example comes from the data collected from clients using the frontline healthcare assessment. Basically, employees' managers were asked to rate the given employee's attendance and punctuality on a 5-point scale, ranging from very poor to exceptional. And what you see here is that for both outcomes, employees who scored in the green band were almost 50% more likely to have exceptional attendance and exceptional punctuality relative to those in the lowest score band. Similarly, with respect to extra management time, employees who took the safety orientation assessment who had scored red are more than twice as likely to require 3 or more extra hours per week of management time compared to those who scored in the highest score band. Similarly, with respect to integrity, this data comes from clients who had used the service safety assessment, and we see a similar pattern here where those who scored in the highest score band were almost 50% more likely to have exceptional integrity relative to those in the lowest score band. Again, the overall findings here pointing to the fact that by prioritizing applicants who are scoring in the green band over yellow and yellow over red, on average, you're more likely to make a better hiring decision, all other things being equal. One final example here deals with sales. And so this data was obtained from a large retail organization that conducted a quality of hire study about a year after implementing a custom sales assessment. And you'll note that red was not included here because the sample size was too small to yield meaningful results. This particular client prioritized hiring yellow and green over red scoring candidates, which, as an aside, is not strictly illegal, but is also not generally considered a best practice because assessment results represent only one of many pieces of information that applicants provide, and you're potentially doing yourself a disservice by overemphasizing the assessment results and ignoring all of the other information that an applicant provides. But as you can see in this example, if this organization were to prioritize hiring only candidates who scored green on the assessment, their sales would improve significantly. There was about a $7.50 difference in terms of sales per hour between green hires and yellow hires, which doesn't sound like a lot, but even assuming that that organization hired 500 employees per year and each worker worked part-time, let's say 15 hours per week, in total, that leads to an increase in revenue of about $2.5 million, and that's only 500 employees. So that's a significant increase in revenue with a relatively small investment on the flip side of that. And again, this is something that we have the ability to look at post-implementation by conducting a quality of hire study. Finally, I want to close things out by going over a couple of best practices when it comes to using assessments to help you maximize the value you get from them should you decide to use them as part of your hiring process. Assessments have the potential to provide a lot of value to your organization, but they do also come with some potential pitfalls if used improperly. And so really, this slide is intended to be a checklist of sorts for you to review as you look to utilize assessments to their fullest extent. So looking at the do's column, starting at the top here, there's one thing that we can say with certainty when it comes to the hiring process. It's that the best predictor of future work behavior is past work behavior. In other words, the best predictor of future work performance is past performance. So if you're considering hiring a former employee, for example, you're much better off relying on the information you have about their past performance than looking at the assessment results. Similarly, while the assessments do provide valuable information about a candidate's suitability for employment, that info should not necessarily outweigh a candid assessment of that candidate's performance that's been provided by a former supervisor in another job. Second, I want to make it clear that assessments are not a panacea. They are not going to predict with 100% accuracy who is going to be an exceptional hire. And that same criticism applies to any selection tool that's used, whether it's interviews, reference checks, background checks, qualifications questions. All of those assessment methods are subject to both false positives and false negatives. And it's for that reason that we recommend that the assessments be used as one piece of the hiring puzzle. In other words, look at the assessment results, but consider them in tandem with all of the other information that's been provided. Just because somebody scores red on an assessment does not mean that they have the potential to be an exceptional employee. So really, it's important to look at all of the information that you've been provided. And then finally, with respect to the last two bullet points, training is key. And so to maximize the benefit associated with using assessments, it's really important to ensure that you set clear expectations with your hiring managers, recruiters, and other folks who are going to be using this information so that they know how the assessment results should be used and interpreted. And then there should be some follow-up action to make sure that those users are actually following the guidelines that you're providing them. Shifting our attention to the right-hand column, there are a number of things that we would consider to be don'ts or things to watch out for. And so clearly, coaching applicants provides an advantage to some applicants that others would not receive, and that's very clearly a no-no and could get you into hot water with federal enforcement agencies. We also recommend that you do not share results with the candidates. We found that based on our own experience as well as the empirical research from many other organizations, there's far more risk to sharing the results with candidates, whether it's specific to the assessments or pertains to any other part of a hiring decision. Candidates may take offense, and while the desire to provide developmental feedback is certainly understandable, it's far outweighed by the risk of doing so. Allowing candidates to retest many times is not something that we generally recommend either. Personality is relatively stable across one's lifespan. And so if a candidate is taking the same assessment over and over, that may suggest that they're trying to game the system. And our recommendation is, if you're looking at an applicant's assessment results, it's generally the first result that you should be paying the most attention to, because in theory, that's when they're most likely to provide candid responses. And then finally, it's really, really important to ensure that for a given position, you have the same hiring process. And so we strongly discourage administering assessments at different stages of the hiring process, or, for example, administering the assessments for applicants to the same position, but not to others. That provides an inconsistency that can lead to enforcement action from the EEOC or other agencies. So that's certainly something to avoid. And that's all that I had prepared. So with that being said, I think we have a little bit of time left for questions. Agnes, did you have any that came through on the chat here?
Yes, so the first question that came in, let me just scroll to it real quick. The assessment's asking former managers of the employee.
Are the assessments asking? I'm not quite clear on what is being asked there. The assessments are self-report. In other words, they ask applicants to describe themselves, and so there's no reference to former managers or anything like that. It basically gets at how they behave at work and has nothing to do with prior jobs or former supervisors.
All right, and then we just have one more. Do you recommend using assessments on current employees applying for a different position?
Absolutely not. And the reason for that is that, as I said, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And even if this applicant or this employee is applying for a completely different position in a different functional area, you're going to be better off looking at their performance in their current job and in prior jobs in your organization to forecast how they might perform in the job they're applying for. That's going to provide you with much more predictive utility than an assessment would. And that's because, as I said, assessments are most useful when hiring managers are unfamiliar with the applicant. Are there any other questions?
Those are all of the questions that came in.
Wonderful. Well, let me just finish up by saying great job, Mike. Thank you very much. For those of you that may have additional questions, but were too shy to ask them in our session, by all means, feel free to follow up with, if you're an existing Cadient Talent customer, with your CSM. For those of you who are new to Cadient, we welcome the opportunity to provide you with additional information on our assessment solution, but also our complete recruitment solution here at Cadient Talent as well. We appreciate the 32 minutes that you've given us today, and we do hope that you've learned a thing or two about assessments, and wanted to thank you again for your time, and appreciate the opportunity. Mike, again, great job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thanks again to everyone who attended. If you have any questions, you can see my contact information here. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Hope everyone has a good rest of your day.